Let's get started. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Toraso Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. All right, we are ready to start. So we had 2 questions that were sent to me this week that I'm going to start with. And then we will have some thoughts on the chart portion that I prepared that hopefully will be of interest and seem relevant, because they are, of course. So 2 questions. One question was, I'll start with the second question because that's a shorter answer. And then the first question, that's a little bit of a longer answer. So I was questioned on the whole idea of the rainbow. Of course, the rainbow relates to this past Torah portion of Noah, where after the whole flood, and Noah is like a little scared, should he start having children and perpetuating the species, what's going to happen? He doesn't want to create children to be wiped out again. And God makes this covenant, this promise that he will never again destroy mankind as he did this time. And the sign is a rainbow. It's actually very interesting. I learned something I never knew before, that until after the flood, there was never a rainbow in the world. The first rainbow that ever occurred was after the flood. And the reason is because the rainbow is a refraction of the light as it's filtered through the clouds. So until the flood, the world was in a very coarsened, spiritually speaking, state. It was very coarse spiritually, which actually reflected the spiritual coarseness reflected a physical coarseness. So the clouds were thicker than we know them now. And since the clouds were so thick, they didn't refract the light. There was no rainbow. But the flood, where the world was underwater for an entire solar year, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, but the water flooded the world, as we learned last week, for not only a lunar year, but 11 more days for a solar year. So it was not only, as we discussed last week, it was not only a punitive, which it definitely was, a punitive washing away of all. It was also a cleansing. It was also a refinement. So post the flood, the world was more refined spiritually than it had ever been before, which means physically it was more refined. It was finer. It was less coarse. And as such, now the clouds could refract the light. Now there could be rainbows. So the first rainbow literally came after the flood. Now, how do we view a rainbow? And this is what I was asked. How do we view the light of a rainbow? And we know there's a blessing we say when you see a rainbow, there's a blessing you say on it. That God remembers the covenant, made the rainbow. So how do we view a rainbow? Is a rainbow a good sign or a bad sign? And if we look in the writings of our sages, it seems like almost like a mixed message. So the answer is, it depends which type of rainbow. We're told there are dark rainbows and light rainbows. We personally saw a beautiful light rainbow on Friday afternoon. I just caught a glimpse of it in the mirror of my car. I was the driver, so I couldn't turn back, but I saw in the mirror, I said, oh my gosh, there's a rainbow. And then everyone turned to look, but I couldn't turn to look. But the glimpse I caught was a beautiful light rainbow. It was raining very heavily. It's awesome to drive in. But then there was this beautiful light rainbow, which is very nice on Friday afternoon before the portion of Noah. We were hoping for a rainbow, and we actually got one. I don't usually see rainbows. So we're told that if you see a light rainbow, very luminous rainbow, it's a good sign. If you see a dark rainbow, it's a rainbow, but it's dark. You don't see the light shining in it. It's a very bad sign. So what are these 2 signs expressing? Well, they're sort of both expressing the same thing, but from 2 different angles. The dark rainbow is expressing the world really deserves punishment. It actually really deserves destruction. But since God made a promise, he's keeping his word. He's not going to destroy us. So the dark rainbow is a sign of the covenant, but it's a negative sign because it's a sign that we really deserve destruction, but aren't getting it because God promised. The light rainbow is the other angle. Concept.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry, now I hear my echo. I don't know why. Is the other angle when we're being told more, like God's remembering the promise he made for us. So he's showering us with that love of like, I made this promise to maintain your species. So it's not the you deserve destruction, but it's more the I made this promise, I'm going to maintain man. As versus a dark rainbow, which is you deserve destruction, but I'm not going to do it because I made a promise. And that's why the dark rainbow is viewed as a negative sign that we deserve destruction, but aren't getting destroyed. And the light rainbow is viewed as a positive sign of God keeping his promise and his word to us. And that's why it's said, because of the negative implications of the rainbow, that a very virtuous generation would never see a rainbow because there's no need for God to remind us that we deserve destruction. But the light rainbows could always happen because they're a positive sign of God's commitment to us to always maintain mankind. So that was the rainbow scoop. Any questions on that before I go to answer the other question that came up? So the other question was about, so we had the rainbow this past week and we also had Rosh Chodesh. 2 days Rosh Chodesh, as we're going to have for the next 2 months, I believe 2-day Rosh Chodesh is. So we know Rosh Chodesh is a woman's holiday. You've probably heard that at somewhere along the line. Rosh Chodesh means the first day of the month, which Jewish, of course, a little interesting. So it's really could be when it's a 2-day holiday, it's the last day of the preceding month and the first day of the new lunar month. If it's a 1-day holiday, it's just the first day of the month. And it's considered a very, very spiritually special day. That's considered a day connected to women. To such a degree that we're told women uniquely should abstain from what was viewed as hard work. Nowadays, of course, our work is not hard, but like, for example, sewing, laundry, ironing, cutting hair, all those things that were viewed as more laborious, but nowadays, of course, they're not, but we still don't do them because women are supposed to not work on this special Women's Day. So why is Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month, connected to women? Like, what did women do to deserve the honor? Even if you might be like, oh, I want to do my laundry today, I can't. Okay, that's an inconvenience. But it's really all coming from making us feeling good and knowing we have a day off working hard. So what's the connection of women and Rosh Chodesh? It's actually a very Kabbalistic connection. So, and I think we've touched on it before, just to understand, first of all, Rosh Chodesh is the first day of the month, is considered in a sense, the holiest day of the month. Rosh means head, Chodesh means month. So it's the head of the month. It's not just the first day, it's the head. Because the head contains the entire energy of what's going to come forth. Just as like when a baby's born, so he's really little. But inside is already the potential of all the life, of all the years, of all the abilities that will develop over much time. So Rosh Chodesh is the head, Rosh head of the month. Within it is embedded all the energy of the entire month. It's all there in potential. We don't see it actualized, but it's all there. And from that reason, it's considered the most messianic day of the month. It's considered the day of Mashiach of the month. Most auspicious Mashiach energy is on Rosh Chodesh. It's also the day when spiritually we are all on a higher spiritual level than any other day of the entire month, in that our highest spiritual soul power, again, connected to Mashiach, which is the energy of the day, actually enters inside of us. So we have 5 levels of soul, and the highest and 5th level, called Yechida, which never is normally inside our body because it's very, very high, only if like we're dying for God's name, enters into us every Rosh Chodesh, because it's the Mashiach element of the soul, and Rosh Chodesh is a Mashiach element of the month. So on the day of Mashiach energy, our soul's Mashiach energy shines inside of us. So it's a very powerful day. But why is it connected to women? So it's connected to women because women and the moon share the same energy. Women and the moon, and there are many other parallelisms like the Jewish people in contrast to the non-Jewish world, or King David, are all the energy which is the 10th of God's 10 spiritual powers. God's spiritual powers that are Kabbalistically called Sephiros or Sphirot, which means the way God's energy shines in this world. So his 10th and final power is called sovereignty. In the Hebrew, it's called Malchus or Malchut. And sovereignty, the Jewish version of sovereign, is very different from the secular version. Because in the Jewish perspective, a king has nothing. He only has what the people give him. The rest of us work for a living. He's just relying on us to support him. So it says the king has nothing of his own. He's fed, he exists by virtue of the people's belief in him. So sovereignty is the final of God's divine dimensions. And it has nothing of its own, but its light is the most powerful. But it only in truth reflects or absorbs and then can shine with the light of others. So in God's divine dimensions, Malchus, sovereignty, is a 10th and final dimension. It's got nothing, but it absorbs all the preceding 9 dimensions and then can shine that light. So it has the most powerful light based on what it's absorbing and reflecting from others. And this is parallel to the moon, because of course the light of the moon is really what she's reflecting as the light of the sun. So it seems like a smaller light. But we're told by the times of the redemption, by the times of Mashiach, the light of the moon will be equal and or perhaps greater than the light of the sun, which reflects King David. It says King David had nothing of his own. King David was supposed to be a stillborn. He was supposed to be not born, but he's King David. So he was donated years. Adam donated him 70 years. And the force of evil took that away. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph donated him combined 70 years. He's only living life based on donated years. And yet this is King David. And so too with women. Women are also, women versus men would be like sovereignty versus the other 9 dimensions, that women have a reflected light. Women is the recipient, and yet the light she shines is going to be more than that she was given. Just as the moon's light is going to be more than she was given, just as King David's light is more than he was given. This all connects to this really deep idea, take it a step further, that when God first created the world, the sun and the moon were 2 equal luminaries. And then it says the moon complained to God and said, God, you can't have 2 kings in 1 crown. Here, the sun and the moon were 2 rulers, but we're equal. That doesn't work. And God said, you're right. Go and make yourself small. And the moon's like, well, that's not what I wanted to happen. God said, well, I'll give you a lot of stars, so you should feel better about the situation, but go and make yourself small. So the moon had to diminish herself. So the sun is the power and the moon is reflecting the light of. But of course, something was going on there deeper than that. And we see it in the specificity of God's words to the moon. God didn't just say, make yourself small. God said, go and make yourself small. Everything is very precise. Go and make yourself small. So this idea of going implies, even though you made yourself small, it's ultimately for you to go. It's for your ultimate growth. Because there's a concept that a descent is only for the purpose of an ascent. We go down to go up even higher. So if the moon started off by creation equal to the sun and God told her to shrink, the only reason is because ultimately she's become even greater. It'll take a long time, 5,782 years. But ultimately she's going to become greater. As we said, in the times of redemption, the light of the moon will be equal to and greater than the light of the sun, as is the light of King David, the light of the redemption, and the light of women. So that's the idea of women, the moon, and really in a sense, the Jewish people. The Jewish people, in contrast to the rest of the world, like women in contrast to men, like the moon in contrast to the sun, is all the same idea of the force that seemingly is smaller, seemingly is weaker, seemingly has no light of its own, and actually ultimately is going to shine with a much greater light. The moon and the Jewish people are very parallel. We both are cyclical. The Jewish people, like the moon, wax and wane, get smaller, and then somehow are revived and start all over again. We're counted like the moon. Our holidays are based on the moon. We're very lunar-based people. And within the Jewish people, most specifically, women also have these cycles and these waxings and these wanings. And it's all the same concept of God's power of sovereignty, which is the power of redemption, which is why it says that by Mashiach, this 10th and seemingly smallest and seemingly weakest power of God will become the dominant power, will be the power that will reflect the highest energies, as will be the power of women, because that is women's power, which is why it says that by Mashiach will fulfill the verse where it says, a woman of valor is a crown of her husband. Very famous verse in the Hebrew, if you know it, Eshes Chayil Ateres Ba'ala. The woman of valor is the crown. A crown means higher than the head. So the husband might be the head, but the woman's the crown over him. So when are we going to see this fulfilled? By the redemption. When Mashiach's energy will be dominant, when Malchus, sovereignty's energy will be dominant, when the Jewish people's energy will be dominant, also the power of women will be dominant. Since women have the same energy as redemption, with the redemption, the woman's powers will be revealed to be what they truly are, and therefore higher than the crown over the man's energies. So that's the deep link between the women and the moon, and therefore the women and Rosh Chodesh, the holiday of the moon. So I threw a lot of Kabbalistic ideas at you. Any questions on any of it?
I have a question.
Sure, Chava.
About not ironing, not doing laundry, and you mentioned the third thing I forgot, not sewing. Is it a law? Is it a custom? What is it?
It's a custom, but it's called a Minhag Yisrael, a Jewish custom. And our sages say Minhag Yisrael Tairahi. A Jewish custom has the force of a law. So it is a Jewish custom. And as a Jewish custom, we follow it.
So is there like a list
of things women are not allowed to do on Rosh Chodesh?
Yes.
Those are, I think, basically the list. That's anything that has to do with that field, which would mean sewing or embroidering or knitting, anything along those lines, washing clothes, ironing. That's generally the list given. You're still allowed to shop, you're still allowed to cook, you're still allowed to wash your dishes and wash your floors. All those weren't removed from our to-do list. But the sewing, knitting, embroidering, ironing, washing, all that was.
That's interesting because it's not intuitive. Washing the floor or doing dishes seems to be much more work and much less as a joy, a celebration. But embroidering, that could be like a very pleasant activity that people do for fun.
I think it's because of nowadays. Meaning nowadays, washing means pressing buttons on your washing machine. Even ironing means, plugging in an iron and lightly going like this. And most people that sew or embroider or knit do it for pleasure. It's cheaper in the stores. They do it because they enjoy it. It's relaxation, it's pleasure, it's joy. But if you go back to our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our great-great-grandmothers, all of those things were really work. Washing day was my mother-in-law remembers, it's not so many generations back, but she was in Israel, so it was a little more primitive then. Just like you hear in the Shtetl of Europe, washing was an entire day's work. And ironing, meant you heated up that heavy iron and sewing, and this was all work. It was all hard stuff that we physically worked hard doing. So it was in those days considered very, very laborious and not as needed, meaning they're not going to say you can't cook, you can't eat that day. They're not going to say you can't wash your dishes that day or do your basic cleanliness. But these things which are work but which don't have to be done that day, do it a different day. Make this day special and give yourself a break. So I understand it's not intuitive now because we wouldn't view the list the same. We would make a different list. But for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, the list made a lot of sense. It was all work, but it was all work that doesn't have to be done every day. So our sages are saying, give yourself a break. Make it a little easier, Rosh Chodesh. It's your holiday. It's your energy shining. Make your life a little easier.
Okay, so when you say custom, I'm trying to understand, is it on the same level custom like chicken is meat?
No,
Like we can,
no, chicken is meat is a law.
it's a law.
Yeah, that's not a custom.
Okay.
Meaning what you're saying is that chicken would make you in the meat category, you have to wait for 6 hours. No, that's not a custom. That's a law. It's a minhag. There are many, many, many. So in Jewish law, we have things that are biblical in origin. We have things that are rabbinic, and we have customs.
Mm-hmm.
And, biblically, we are not allowed to burn a fire on the Sabbath. And rabbinically, based on that, we can turn on and off an electric light on the Shabbos, on the Sabbath. And then there are many customs of the Shabbos that aren't either, but we have to keep. And I'm trying to think, of course, in my head right now of a custom. But I would say, for example, a custom would be that on Shabbos, you're supposed to cover the table, ideally with a white tablecloth.
Mm-hmm.
That is a Jewish custom. It's not a law.
Mm-hmm.
We won't say you have an X on your chart if you don't cover your table, or if you cover your table with a purple tablecloth. But the traditional Jewish custom is white. It's supposed to be a tablecloth. All your tables are supposed to be covered. And it's supposed to be white. Another custom of the Jewish people that have to do with Shabbos is you're supposed to keep salt on the table the entire Shabbos. Again, that's a custom. It's not, again, that you're going to get punished if you don't do it. They have this big X because you didn't keep salt on your table, but it's a custom. Another custom, which isn't limited to Shabbos, but comes up on Shabbos because of the challah, is it's a custom not to hand someone a piece of bread directly. When you're giving someone, you're cutting the challah, you're distributing the bread, the custom is to put it down so the person picks it up, but you don't give the bread into their hand. That's a custom. So all of those things are customs. They're not biblical, they're not rabbinic, they're customs. Do we have to keep them? We're supposed to keep all of them. We're told, again, the way our sages phrase it is, Minhag Yisrael Torah Hi. A Jewish custom has the authority of Torah. In a Kabbalistic, Hasidic way of understanding this, we're told that it's almost as if the higher the energy, the more obscurely it comes down. So what's biblical, so to speak, had a shorter journey. If it was higher, it couldn't come down as clearly as biblical. It had to come down as rabbinic. And if it's even higher than that, it doesn't even come down as rabbinic. It comes down as a custom. Because since it's from such a high source, coming down to this world, it becomes obscured. So we find it as a custom. So therefore, we're told to hold very, very tight to the Jewish customs, that they have tremendous spiritual energy. In the Chabad way of the asking the 4 questions by the Seder, which is exactly the same way Maimonides writes it, but many Jews today do it differently. But in the Chabad way, we don't first ask about the matzah, which is biblical in origin, or the maror, the bitter herb, which is today rabbinic, but we ask about the dipping, which is a custom. It's not biblical, it's not rabbinic, it's a Jewish custom, a minhag. That is the Hebrew word for a Jewish custom. And of course, there's different reasons why, but one of the reasons that it's first is to give us this very deep lesson that the customs are what keep us going. The customs are what grab the eyes of the child. The customs are what's adding the color and flavor to Judaism. Don't give them up. They're really necessary to preserve the continuity of Judaism. Just as a child is asking questions, what he's intrigued by, so we're told the first thing he notices is the Jewish customs. We got to maintain those customs because they're what's carrying on. They're what's giving the energy of the continuity that the child is always going to be invested in what is this Judaism. So customs have tremendous spiritual weight. And again, according to Hasidic Kabbalistic thought, specifically because they're so powerful, they came down as customs. A very strong custom that we just went through in the holiday cycle is what's called hakafos. The dancing on Shmini Atzeres and Simchat Torah is a custom. It says it's a custom from the days of the prophets. The day before that, Hoshana Rabbah, for those of you that went the whole way, all 9 yards, there's a very ancient custom to take 5 willows and bang them. The banging of the willows, the willow, which means in Hebrew sweet, to sweeten the negativity, is a very, very, very ancient Jewish custom. It goes back thousands of years to the times of the prophets. So these customs we're saying is what we hold on to. They have a lot of depth, a lot of very high energy, and that's why they came down as customs. Any other questions on this? Okay, well, let's talk about the Parsha. We don't have that much time left. I prepared quite a lot. We'll see. So I wanted to give over an interesting idea, which is the Torah. It's from the Torah portion, but it's not really talking about the Torah portion as much as some more broader ideas that I thought would be very relevant or could be relevant and are related to this week's Torah portion. So I'd like to share that first, and then if we have time, I'm going to share something else that's maybe a little bit more directly the Torah portion. So in this week's Torah portion, we speak about Abraham, Avraham. We're told it's a very happy week. So be happy. It's a happy week because we live the whole week with Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. It's great energy. The Torah portion of Bereshit started off nice. God creates the world. But in the end, it speaks about man's sins. That wasn't so happy. And Noach has a lot to do with destruction, though in the end, it's positive. Abraham is born. But this week is all about Abraham. It's a happy week. So in this week's Torah portion, Abraham builds 3 altars for God. There's many, many, many specific learnings out that I'm not going to go into about these 3 altars because that I knew we wouldn't have time for. But he builds 3 altars for God. Now, why is that significant? There's a general rule, which I'll say in the Hebrew, and then we'll explain the English. It's a very important rule that we keep in mind when we're learning this entire book of Genesis, the first of the 5 books. In Hebrew, we call it Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim, which means the actions of the forefathers, of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are the sign. They give energy for the children, for us. So whatever Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, whatever they did, it's all creating footprints. It's all creating spiritual energies that we can walk the path, how it's relevant to us. So Abraham building precisely 3 altars has a lot to do with us and the altars we built many years later, and the altars we continue today, even with the destruction of the temple. So it's interesting because the reason why Abraham built these 3 altars is because an altar has 3 functions. Our sages list 4, which get combined into 3, and Maimonides, and we also see this pattern. But I'll just make it simple because we're a little short on time. We have 3 basic functions of the altar, meaning the altar figured as the central role in the temple, in God's home, the Beit HaMikdash, God's home. The central activity was surrounding the altar. So what was the purpose of the altar? Well, you offer there an offering called in Hebrew a korban. The word korban, offering, means karov, to come close. So korban had a very strong value to bring us close to God, but for what reason? So our sages, they do it a play on word. It's better in the Hebrew than the English, but I'll say it in the English. In the Hebrew, it all sounds very similar. So it's very clever, but it's not going to work in the translation. The altar had 3 functions. The offerings had 3 functions. 1, to remove negativity. If there was a negative decree on us or on the Jewish people or on us individually. Or if there were sins that were creating spiritual burdens on us or on the Jewish people, the altar, the offerings cleansed away, nullified the negativity. That's one function of the altar. One altar Abraham built. The second function of the altar is to draw down sustenance, to draw down literally food, to draw down financial resources for the Jew offering and for the Jewish people in general. Second altar that Abraham built. And the third function of the altar is to endear the Jewish people to God. Third function. So Abraham built 3 altars because an altar has 3 functions. Sometimes is to remove the negativity, the negative decrees, sin and their consequence. Sometimes is to draw down to us sustenance and blessings. And sometimes is to endear us to God, just to bring us close to God. Which relates to the types of offering that were offered on the altar. There were 4 types. Again, 4 that becomes 3, just as I took 4 functions and made them 3. Removing the decree was really removing the decree / removing the punishment. We make 1. So also there are 4 types of offerings. These were the 4 offerings that could be offered in the temple. One offering is called an olah, a chatas, an asham, and shlamim. The chatas and asham is similar. So chatas and asham were sin offerings. So if a person sinned, they had to bring an offering to remove the consequence of sin, chatas or asham, depending on what you sinned. Then there's another type of offering called shlomim. Shlomim was the peace offering, and it said everyone got to eat from it. A piece was burnt for God, a piece was eaten by the priest, and a piece was actually eaten by the Jew who offered it. This is the only offering that the person who offered it also got a steak or 2. He got some of the meat. So God ate some, the priest ate some, and the person who offered it ate some. That's why it's called shlomim, the word shalom. It brought peace. Everyone got to enjoy. That's the idea of us being sustained. And then there's the olah. The olah was completely burnt. It went up to God. So we have 4 offerings that are 3 real types, parallel to the 4, which is really 3 reasons for the offering. Remember, Abraham builds 3 altars to remove negativity, to remove decrees, to remove sin, to draw down sustenance, to bring us close to God. Parallel to this, we have 2 types of offerings that are 1 for our sins. Just as the offerings were brought to remove negativity, remove bad decrees, remove sins, a chatas and an asham are 2 types of sin offerings to remove the consequence of sin, because the offering removes the decrees, removes sin. Then we have the offering called shlomim. Shlomim, we said, is the peace offering that draws down blessings. That's like the second function of the offering, to draw sustenance down to the people. So just as Abraham's second altar was to draw down sustenance, we can offer in the times of the temple shlomim, peace offerings. I get to eat some, the priest gets to eat some, God gets to eat some, that draws down blessing, that draws down sustenance to the world. And then the third type of offering is called an olah. It's completely burnt. It's purely for God. That's like the third function of Abraham's altars. What's the purpose of the altar? Just to make us dear to God. I'm going to say it one more time because I know it's a lot of words, some of which are in Hebrew. I wish I could write this out clearly in some nice board format, but I don't have that ability here. So we have Abraham building an offering to remove negativity, parallel to us offering the 2 types of sin offerings called chatas and asham. We have Abraham building another altar to draw down sustenance, parallel to our offerings called shlomim that draw down blessings to us. And we have the third altar Abraham built to bring us close to God, parallel to that third type of offering called an olah that brings us close because it's purely, purely, purely for God, nothing to do with us. Now, the truth is every offering, in a sense, has all 3 elements. Every offering, whatever it is, somewhat is removing negativity, somewhat is drawing down blessing, and somewhat is bringing us close to God. And we see this in the three parts of every offering. So every time you offer any offering to God in the temple, there were three things you always had to do. You always had to sprinkle the blood. You always had to give something to the priest. The owner only got by the shlomim, but the priest always gets something. Even in an oila, he gets the skin, so he still gets something. And every offering brought a revelation of God's presence. Because whenever an offering was offered in the temple, it said fire came down from heaven to consume the offering. So every offering was sprinkling the blood. Every offering, the priest is getting something. And every offering, God is revealed in this world. So the sprinkling of the blood is the idea of the offering, removing negativity, removing my sins, removing negative decrees. Sprinkling of the blood symbolizes my atonement. The idea of the priest benefiting in some way, meat or at least the skins, is the offering drawing down blessings, drawing down sustenance to our world. And the idea of God's presence being revealed, the fire coming down and consuming the offering, is the idea of the offering as that tool that brings me close to God. So what does this have to do to me today, now that it's been about 1900 years since we had a temple, God willing, to be rebuilt today? But right now, I'm still doing this work because the offerings were called work for God, and we're still doing this work, which means there's some things we do for God to remove negativity. There's some things we do for God that bring down all the extra blessings, and there's some things we do that's purely for God. So what removes the negativity in my service? When I do tshuva, when I repent. As we were learning extensively, repentance removes the negative decrees. Repentance removes my sins. So just as Abraham built an altar to symbolize this idea of removing negative decrees, removing sins, just as in the times of the temple, the people offered the asham and the chatas, the sin offerings, to remove the negativity, remove the sin, remove the consequence, I can do the same thing. When I repent, I'm achieving what Abraham achieved by his altar. I'm achieving what the Jewish people achieved in the temple by their sin offerings to God. I can do that myself. It doesn't have to cost any money. Sin offering was quite expensive. It's the offering up my own flesh and blood. Like the sprinkling of the blood, I'm offering my own blood to God when I repent. The second altar that Abraham built was to draw down blessings, to draw down sustenance. Like we said, the offering called the shlomim, the peace offering that draws down blessings and sustenance. I also can draw down blessings and sustenance to this world. What can I do to bring blessings and sustenance to myself and blessings and sustenance to this world? Every time I do what I'm doing right now, which is learning Torah, or doing any mitzvah. We spoke in the beginning about a mitzvah, rabbinic, biblical, a custom, any of those things. They have many functions, and one of which is to draw down the blessings, to draw down the sustenance. So Abraham had to build an altar to draw down blessings and sustenance. Our ancestors offered an offering, a shlomim, again, quite an expensive endeavor, to draw down those blessings. And we can do it every time we learn Torah, every time we study God's will and wisdom, every time we do a commandment. We put up a mezuzah, we check our mezuzah, we buy food with a kosher certification, we wait 6 hours because we ate meat and now we're going to eat dairy. We don't use our cell phones or drive on the Sabbath. Every time we're doing a commandment, it's like Abraham's second altar. It's like offering that offering of the shlomim to God. It's drawing down the blessings, the sustenance, the nurturing to the world. And then there was the third altar that Abraham built. And the third altar, we said, was just to bring us dear to God. And again, there was a very expensive offering that had no personal gain. It wasn't because you sinned. It wasn't because you want more blessings. It was just for God's sake. And that's called the oila. Just for God's sake, it was completely burnt. It's just to give pleasure to God. And we also can do that today. It's not when I'm doing my repentance that removes the negativity. It's not regular Torah and keeping the mitzvahs. That's bringing down my blessings. It's something else I can do for God that is the dearest thing I can do for God. And that's called self-sacrifice. Anytime any of us makes a choice that's self-sacrifice, that's just like offering, that offering that was an olah, it's completely burnt up to God. It's like Abraham's third altar, just for God's sake, just to make us dear for God. So again, Abraham built an altar to remove negativity, remove decrees, remove sins. I can do the same. When I repent, I'm doing the exact same thing, just like my ancestors did with the sin offerings in the temple. Abraham built a second altar to draw down sustenance and blessings to the world. I can do the same. Just like my ancestors offered the offering called shlamim, I can do the same. Every time I want to bring down more blessings in my life, learn more Torah, you're drawing down the blessings. Do another thing that God decreed. You're drawing down the blessings, you're drawing down the sustenance. And Abraham built a third altar just for dearness to God. Like that offering that was an oil, it was completely burnt up, it was completely for God, no benefit for the person at all, just for God's sake. And every time I want to give God that gift, I can do it as well. And what it requires is self-sacrifice. Now, of course, for each one of us, the term self-sacrifice has different implications. Because for one of us, it might be self-sacrifice to do that commandment and not use your cell phone on Shabbos. You could say, whoa, for me, that's incredible self-sacrifice. Great. God knows. God accepts it as such. And for another person, well, I'm not using my cell phone on Shabbos. I mean, I'm following the Sabbath and I know that's a rule and it's a little difficult, but whatever, I'm doing it because it's a rule. So that wouldn't be self-sacrifice for you. But maybe there's another area in your life where it's self-sacrifice, where it's really difficult for you and you really don't want to do this. But God says, so you're going to do it for him. You're not doing it for yourself. It's really hard. You're really not interested. You really don't want to do it. But you're giving God a gift. Just because you know this is very, very precious for God, when you choose to do something that's really difficult, but you know he wants it. So you sacrifice yourself and you sacrifice what you want to give him what he wants. That's just like Abraham's third altar. It's just like that offering of the oila that was completely a gift to God. When I do what everything inside of me is saying, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to do it. But I know God really wants it. And I do it anyway. That's my self-sacrifice. Now, what sometimes happens in life, I've just experienced myself, is you can start off with something that you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. This is really hard, but I'm doing it for God because I want to give him a gift. And then after a while, you get used to doing it. So it's not so hard. And then you got to give God a different gift because that already became normal to you. But when you start off and it's difficult, but you're doing it anyway because you're sacrificing for God, it's very, very, very powerful. That's Abraham's third altar. That's the offering of the oil that's completely burnt. And that's what you can give to God every time you do something difficult. So remember last week we spoke about fasting Yom Kippur. I'm going to pick on Bella now because I see her face. Thank you, Orly, Bella, and Menucha that allow me to see faces and not black screens. If anyone else's face I'm seeing, you're not on my current screen. I could check if anyone else is so gracious to me tonight. Nope, just you. So thank you. So we're picking on Bella because I see her face. See, it's dangerous if I see her face. So we discussed with Bella last, a few weeks ago was trying to fast in Yom Kippur and she mentioned it was really hard. And we discussed how next year she's totally fasting. And we went through a practical tip. She's going to be like Orly. Every year it's going to be easier. And she's going to do it. So it's self-sacrifice. She doesn't want to do it. It's really hard. She's a poor faster. So what is she doing it for? Because there's a God and that's what he wants. And she's going to sacrifice for him. That's self-sacrifice. Now me, I fast every year in Yom Kippur. God doesn't give me the same credit because I don't even think twice about it. So it's not self-sacrifice for God. I just do it. Of course, on some level, it's self-sacrifice because otherwise I'd be eating that day. But it's not that conscious effort of doing something for God that's so difficult, but I'm doing it because he wants. But for Bella, it will be. So for each one of us, self-sacrifice is It's really difficult, but you're doing it because you know this is what God wants. Any questions on any of this? Okay. I thought that was a really powerful concept. That's why I want to share it. And in like 5 minutes left, something else I was going to speak about for half an hour. No, I have 5 minutes. So from all these ideas, I'll just pick out one. This has to do with I'm really trying to think which one should I pick out from all these ideas because there's a lot of ideas here. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at all these notes. I'm trying to think, what can I say in 5 minutes from a lot of notes? Okay, I'm picking up one idea. If we have time, we can do more. This is literally a half an hour worth of information, so one idea is hard. Okay, so in this Torah portion, there's a lot of things that happen. As I said, the life and times of Abraham. And one of them is there was a war going on. We hear a lot of details actually about a war of totally, nations at that time. They don't exist nowadays. We're not related to them. There were 4 kings and there were 5 kings and they were rivaling, and the 4 conquered the 5 because the 4 are so powerful, and the 5 paid tribute to the 4 for many years, and then they rebelled. And then the 4 came and attacked and conquered everyone and took as captive among the captives from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's nephew Lot, which brings us into the story, which is why it's written in Torah. Because Abraham was told about this. Actually, it's explained in the Midrash that this whole plot was to get Abraham to come run after and save Lot, and then they were going to destroy him. But that didn't work out exactly. Abraham is told about this by the not so friendly neighborhood giant called Og, relating to last week's Torah portion. He actually survived the flood. We're told he hung on to the ark and survived. And he was doing this for no good reason. He wanted to destroy Abraham and grab Sarah, but again, didn't turn out the way he suspected either. And Abraham goes, some say just with one person, Eliezer, some say with 318 people, still a very, very weak army. And with complete miracles, sand that turns into arrows, don't ask. He destroys this 4 powerful armies and frees everyone and frees his nephew, and the story continues. And after this, he's like, whoa, that used up a lot of my merits. Like if God sometimes does something, maybe you've experienced this, I've experienced that God does something good for you, and you're like, wait, that was great, but like, did I use up a lot of credit on that situation? So Abraham was like, did I use up a lot of credit? So he wasn't feeling so good. Like, I mean, God was very kind. There were lots of miracles, but I think I used up a lot of my bank account there. So God comes to him and God reassures him, and God says, don't worry, you're gonna have such tremendous reward. And Abraham says, what do I care? I'm childless. What do I need reward for anyway? For Eliezer to inherit more after I go? And God says, no, you're going to have a child. And Abraham says, a child? I know I'm not going to have a child. I looked in the stars. Abraham and Sarai, those were their names, are not going to have children. That's it. Done. Finished. And God said, Abraham and Sarai aren't, but Abraham and Sarah will. Abraham and Sarah will. I'm going to take you out of your astrological, trajectory, Abraham and Sarai. I'm putting you on a new trajectory, Abraham and Sarah, and the stars will no longer rule over you. So what's going on? God's changing their name. He's changing their destiny, and they can have a child, which of course they do. When did God change their name? He changed their name many years later by the circumcision, which is the last event in this week's Torah portion that we're not going to have time to talk about, and you could spend hours talking about it. Abraham is 99, Sarah is 89, and he's having the circumcision. And as he has a circumcision, which is like now putting the mark of a Jew on his flesh, he gets a new name. He gets a new destiny. He's no longer Abraham, he's Abraham, not Avram. Avraham. God added one letter, a hey, to his name. And Sarai is no longer Sarai, which translates as my princess, but Sarah, the princess, the queen. So God changed their names then. Because again, the changing of the name, the changing of the destiny had to do with the circumcision. Because the circumcision was, now you're different. Now you're a Jew. Now it's embedded in your flesh forever. And that's the commandment embedded in the flesh of the Jew. It says every Jewish woman spiritually is like circumcised, and every Jewish man is physically and spiritually circumcised. And that changes us from being under the stars. Abraham and Sarai were under the stars, under nature. And according to nature, they couldn't have kids. But God said, I'm lifting you past the stars. You're not limited to the stars. You're not limited to nature. You're going to become this thing called Jews. Different, not limited by the world. According to the world's view, you can't have a child. That's true. Your physical bodies can't produce a child. But guess what? I'm making you Jewish. Once you're a Jew, you're not limited to the stars. You're not limited to what the astrology, what the world says you're capable of. When you're a Jew, you're higher than the stars. When you're a Jew, you're beyond the stars. As the Midrash says, that God took Abraham over the stars to look down on the stars, because he becomes over the stars when he becomes a Jew. Just like it says, there's no mazel for the Jewish people, meaning mazel, this idea of like what's written in the stars, not like horoscopes written by people in newspapers, but the real thing, the real destiny that is written in nature does apply, but just to the world, not to the Jew. Because every single Jew is above the stars, which means that for each one of us, whatever we aspire for, whatever we strive for, whatever we're going to set our destiny to be, whatever good goal we're going to create for ourselves, even if it doesn't make sense because it can't work out, because the world couldn't sustain that, naturally speaking, it doesn't work. Our ancestor was already told, don't think about the astrology. Don't think about nature. Don't limit yourself. Jews aren't limited to what the stars say is destiny. Every Jew, like Abraham, is higher than the stars and has the ability to create his own destiny. And that's the gift we inherited. As we said, the actions of the forefathers are the power for the children. Like Abraham, each one of us can be over the stars and achieve things that are seemingly not possible. But if we're focused on God and we keep walking and use God as our anchor, like Abraham and Sarah, we can achieve those things. And I had a half an hour more to say about the subject, but we're not going to do it today. Let's just do something quickly on, any questions on that? Because I went sort of quickly through that idea. Any questions on that?
I have a question related.
Sure.
You mentioned that Og was saved in the flood.
Mhm.
What was his merit? Was it because he was not friendly? Was it only to let Abraham know about Lot, that Lot was in trouble? Was it the only merit that he was saved for?
It seems he was a tool. Yes, he was an ugly tool of God, meaning he was a very wicked person. He was not saved for any personal merit, but God sometimes keeps negativity in the world as well as a tool. We see this now, and then we see later, we see he plays in later when he was actually hired by the nations that lived in Israel to be their guardian of the doors, to make sure no one, aka the Jews, come in to take over the land. And it's very interesting because when the Jews, now we're talking about hundreds of years later, when the Jews are about to enter Israel, and Og, this giant, is like, and his people are like the barrier, and it says that Moses was scared. Even though there was another next door neighbor giant, Sihon, that was guarding also the borders, and Moses wasn't scared of him. But it says he was scared of Og because he knew Og had this merit, that he had helped, unwittingly had helped Abraham. And God said, don't be scared of him. I'm giving him into your hands. But, there's many, many details. I'm just going to sort of give a nutshell idea here. So here's Og, that officially you'd be scared of because he was such a powerful giant. That wasn't really Moses's issue, but you'd be scared of because he had this big merit. I mean, he helped Abraham. But that was taken care of because Og uprooted a mountain, the same dimension as the camp of the Jewish people, and he was going to throw it on the camp and destroy all the Jews. And when he did that, he wiped away whatever merit he had. Because if he had a merit that he helped Abraham, he surely lost that merit when he was going to destroy all of Abraham's descendants. Which is a very powerful lesson for us, that even though something can look so powerful because it's so big and huge, like Og, powerful because it has such merits, like, so to speak, Og, or powerful for any other reason, in the end of the day, evil is revealed as evil and godly is revealed as godly. So even if Og had this pseudo merit going on, that he helped Abraham, evil's revealed to be evil. And therefore, whatever was seemingly his merit, he himself obliterated by his action. And then it said Moses, who was 15 feet tall, jumped 15 feet with a spear 15 feet. So now we're 45 feet above the ground, and pierced Og's ankle. And then he toppled and killed himself by the fall. So we don't fear evil because we know when you're with God, doesn't make a difference if it's a giant so high that 45 feet up is his ankle. It doesn't make a difference. And therefore we don't fear evil. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay, so just to do a drop, I know we're a little bit over time, but just to do a drop about the laws of Shabbos. So the laws we're up to are the laws of uprooting. So you can't like pick flowers on Shabbos, or pick fruits on Shabbos, or pluck blades of grass on Shabbos, or break off a twig on Shabbos, or do anything that has to do with using a tree. There are many, many laws about trees on Shabbos. Like if the tree is a little shaky, old, not well, frail, and you lean on it and that will cause it to like move, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to sit on a tree stump on Shabbos. You're not allowed to climb on a tree on Shabbos. If something was hanging on a tree, you're not allowed to take it off on Shabbos. Or if you want to put something on a tree, you're not allowed to use a tree's branch to like hang your jacket or your sweater. Or if there was your jacket or sweater on the tree's branch, you're not allowed to take it off on Shabbos. Basically, in no way, shape, or form can you have any use of a tree on Shabbos. If a swing is attached or a hammock is attached directly to a tree, you can't use it on Shabbos. That would be benefiting from and causing movement to a tree. You're not allowed to do any of those things on the Shabbos. Any questions on that? I just went through a lot very quickly. Okay. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for those people that graciously let me see your faces. That was wonderful. And thank you so much for everyone for joining. And again, if anyone, this was I did last week, and I got some people that said they enjoyed it. Any other feedback, any other ideas of what you'd like to learn? I'm open, but of course, there's always so much to talk about in the portion. So that's always a vast reservoir of information. Have a wonderful week. Remember, you can always bring down more blessings, more Torah, another mitzvah. It's like that altar that just brings sustenance and blessings to the world. And you could always do something that just makes you so dear to God when you choose to do something, an act like that altar of self-sacrifice. This isn't about you. This is about God. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.